Let's talk about the armies of the Heretic Astartes with an overview of the Chaos Space Marines in current Warhammer 40K. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Chaos Space Marines on the tabletop. In this video I thought I'd do a general overview of the faction, talking through some of their stronger detachment and unit options. Chaos Space Marines maybe feel like they haven't had too bad a time of it in 10th edition. Their codex came out a bit over a year ago now. Since then they've had a fair bit of success, and a few helpful rules boosts along the way, including the creations of Bile Detachment. For the last balance updates that went alongside the mission deck, Chaos Marines seem to be a pretty solidly mid-tier Warhammer 40k army in terms of sheer power. Win rates are around about 48% or so, and that seems to be the case both in competitive and casual play, and a few good players managing to take them to the top, having won 3 small grand tournaments I think so far in the first 4 weeks, 2 with Renegade Raiders and 1 with Pactbound Zealots, and also going undefeated for 5 games in a row for another one as well. At the moment though, they may be a little bit lesser played compared with what they might normally be. Around about the 15th most played army out of the 28 in Warhammer 40k, as a very popular faction that lots of people like to put on the tabletop when they have chance to. It does feel lower than normal for them. Obviously though, not terrible stuff. They're doing alright at the top levels of play. But perhaps part of it is having quite such rivalry from all the Deity Legion codexes that came out in 2025, all of them releasing with some pretty strong rules, though in particular Death Guard and Thousand Sons at the moment. For this video though, I thought we'd talk through some stronger Chaos Space Marine options, starting out with some of their most commonly played strong units, and going through their detachments in turn, and taking a look at some standout units for them and some strong army lists. Then round up a bunch of other things that I hadn't focused on specific, including the other detachments and other units at the end. Let's jump straight in though, and start with some of the more standout units for the Chaos Marines at the moment, maybe these ones being some of the ones that are most likely to see competitive play. Obviously a little bit arbitrary, and there's plenty more good stuff besides this, a bunch of which I'll talk about later. Things that are fairly unquestionably pretty strong staples though, that are hard to go too far wrong with, having Legionaries or Chosen in Rhinos with some character support, that's rarely going to be a bad move. Some Cultists for sticky objectives and screening, Cypher as a powerful lone operative, the Lord Discordant on the Hellstalker after the big blow up his datasheet got. Vashtorr's great too, and they're often being backed up by at least some heavy fire support, Vindicators or Predator Destructors maybe most commonly. For allies, maybe Nurglings the single most obvious thing, but there's definitely other options as well. Beyond this, I'd still say that the vast majority of the codex is solidly usable, some a bit niche and some in given detachments. After a fair few balance passes, you can usually make most units work to some state or another. Focusing on those staples though, and first up we have the melee combos in Rhinos. The Chaos Rhino is 75 points for a fairly standard stat line, toughness 9 with 10 wounds and fairly fast. It's got transport capacity for 12 models, so really quite a lot of room in the metal box for all flavours of melee nastiness. Some of the most obvious things to put inside that would be the Legionaries and Chosen. As I see the Legionaries solidly usable as the battle line of Chaos, plenty of OC, and then perhaps surprising amounts of threat for a battle line unit, typically taking a pair of heavy melee weapons in a squad of 5, alongside maybe a melter gun or las cannon or something, and then filling out with chainswords. They get to reroll wound rolls against things on objective markers, making them particularly nice for striking out into the mid-board and killing opponents there. As another big option for a scary melee threat out of a Rhino, there's the Chosen. They're significantly more at 125 points per 5 of them. They do get some solidly boosted stat lines, an extra wound, advance and charge, accursed weapons at base with strength 5 and AP -2 damage 1 as just the standard profile, with a couple of upgraded ones mixed in. The Chaos Lord's hard to go too far wrong with as a leader. 3 stratagems for the unit which can be really handy. Most of the detachments have at least something that the Legionaries and Chosen would want. Then he's a big melee damage threat in himself, a bunch of strength 8 and damage 2 attacks, and then once per game having his rage mode where he gets +1 strength, AP, attacks and damage. Certainly a lot scarier when he's hitting at strength 9, AP 3, damage 3 with 6 attacks. It means that both the Legionaries and the Chosen with him around can punch up and destroy some Terminator equivalents. There's definitely other options for leading though. In particular for Chosen, they might enjoy Fabius Bile with his enhancements, perhaps even Abaddon the Despoiler himself if they're being fielded on foot. In any case, for the more standard Rhino squad tactics though, it'd typically be around about 1 or 2 Rhinos full of danger in the majority of army lists for the Chaos Marines. Rhino basically acting as a mobile battlefield bunker, keeping these squad inside safe and then staging charges for them. When they get out, they can disembark 3 inches out of the front, so the Rhino being there basically adds that much to their threat range. Then if there's nothing that's going to be worth charging into this turn, the Rhino can instead move up, maybe trying to aim to get somewhere in the mid-board behind a ruin, or at least to the point where if the Rhinos popped, then the squad inside could disembark behind a ruin. Might tempt enemy damage dealers out, as you do need some actual significant firepower to break one. If the squad jumps out, they can still have value as well, screening out areas of the board, doing secondary objectives, and maybe doing nuisance charges in a pinch. In any case, when the squad gets out though, a lot of the time they'll want to advance and charge the enemy. The Chosen can do it base, and then the Legionaries could do it for one command point. There's options for that in Renegade Raiders, Creations of Bile, and Pactbound Zealots. That basically means that your Chaos Space Marine infantry can have an average charge threat range of around about 20 inches from a Rhino hole. That can be really quite a big area of the mid-board if the opponent's advancing forward. Ideally, whatever combo gets in wants to be hitting into the enemy's primary important damage dealers, hopefully ideally trying to trade up, destroy something that's more value than they are, though it won't always be possible. Ideally, what they don't want to do, though, is destroy something that's just a bit too weak to really justify the investment, and then have the opponent hit them back hard. Particularly with characters attached, once they're exposed, they're just not really all that tough for the points investment. They do have a pretty spectacular amount of damage, though, with detachment buffs and the character bonuses. In particular, Legionaries in Renegade Raiders really enjoy going into mid-board objectives, getting full wound rerolls and extra AP. Another unit that seems to have emerged as a real staple after its points cut and then datasheet changes is the Lord Discordant. I felt like Games Workshop spent a fair bit of 10th edition making these pay for the sins of the past, but in the last update they gave him a meaningful stat line rewrite. He moves 14 inches, so is dead fast now, a little more survivable with a 4+ invulnerable save, has some alright close range shooting with a Bale Flamer and Magma Cutter, and then 9 melee attacks, the Impaler Chainglaive actually being pretty threatening now, a strength 8, AP 3 and damage 3. Beyond that, he's got anti-vehicle rules, marking 1 for a reroll wound rolls of 1, potentially dealing some mortal wound damage up close. Does mean he's a bit matchup specific, but given that lots of people are running knights or large amounts of vehicles at the moment, it's really not the worst thing to have. Typically for war gear, I've seen most people running him with the Bale Flamer and Magma Cutter. Bale Flamer can be nice enough for Overwatch once he's committed, and then it's just a particularly good profile for any good enhancements that the detachment might have on offer. I've seen a few people using different ones, with the Renegade Raiders, Dread Reaver being potentially quite a nice one. That one can have some fairly spectacular damage rerolls if you can get towards the enemy deployment zone, which doesn't seem out of the question with a 14-inch move. In Pactbound Zealots, Intoxicating Elixir, the Slanesh one for the 5+ Feel No Pain is pretty excellent as well, essentially adding plus 50% to his durability for not all that much cost. From there, he'll basically be used as another primary damage dealer, again wanting to use good movement to hide behind terrain somewhere in the mid-board, then hoping to get the charge on something rather than the other way round. As a mounted keyword model, he can use advanced shoot and charge in Renegade Raiders too, which is pretty helpful. It could be the difference between him getting a charge on the target or not doing so. There aren't really too many targets that he's not going to be good in with that Lance Chainglaive, and the mortal wounds to help out against vehicles is particularly good at mauling sort of medium to heavy infantry things, vehicles as well. I guess monsters could be a theoretical weakness, but just given a bunch of high damage attacks, it's not even going to be too bad into them either. He could use his own damage buff to help himself out into vehicles, which seems like the best thing to do most of the time, but also could be marking other vehicles in the army for a bunch of chaos shooting, if that made more sense this turn. In any case, pretty cool to see him as a big scary threat, stalking forwards into the mid-board once again. Before we move on to some other Chaos Space Marine staples, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Tabletop Stronghold. They're one option for some magnetic carry cases for your model soldiers. They're between sales at the moment, though gave me a discount code for 8025 for 25% off their range. Magnetic carry cases have certainly taken off as the way to transport models in more recent 40k. The idea being that you attach small magnets to the bases of your miniatures, put them on magnetic surfaces when they're in transit, and then they don't scrape on other miniatures nearby, and you can fit loads in one space without needing foam. You can DIY your own versions of these, though Tabletop Stronghold have their own custom-made version. Their designs of these mag cases, basically a really sturdy box made of MDF that's very hard to break. And then inside the boxes you have multiple layers worth of steel trays to put the miniatures on. They can be raised or lowered depending on the height of the miniatures that you're wanting to transport. On the front is mounted in an acrylic sheet, so the models are protected but you can see them in transit. Broadly speaking, reviews that I've seen of these are really quite positive. Most people that bought one seem to be fairly happy with them. The biggest criticism I've seen is that they can be a bit heavier than some. Check them out linked in the video description and be sure to use that code if you pick anything up. I'll cycle back to them briefly at the end of the video to talk through their range and designs. Thanks to them for sponsoring this one though. Next up for Chaos staples, we've got the Cultist mob. These ones are some nice chaff cannon fodder to do some grunt work while the rest of the Chaos Marines get stuck in. 10 bodies at toughness 3 with bad saves. Potentially a tiny bit of melee threat if you use dark pacts with them. Mainly there just to be a very cheap unit, and their very nice sticky objectives rule, where if you stand them on a point, then it'll remain yours for the rest of the game until the opponent can actually take it themselves. In particular, that sticky objectives rule is the main reason they're fairly auto-include. It just makes sense to have that active on your home field when it's available for quite this cheap, giving you options like the ability to spread out and screen in unusual ways. Just go off and countercharge enemy deep strikers if they're weak enough for it to be tied up with these. When the late game, just have any objective grabbers in your home field just push forward to the mid board if your opponent can't reach your home field. Just beyond that though, 50 points for a skirmish unit with 10 objective control is pretty handy to have for doing the mission in 40k in general. I certainly could use more of these to use as expendable screening units to force enemies out to destroy them. Next up, for some big guns with the Heretic Astartes, we've got some firepower. Maybe some of the most standout things are the Vindicator and Predator Destructor. The Vindicator at 185 points for a great big cannon at d6 plus 3 shots at strength 14 and damage d6. It's quite a sturdy tank with a 2+ save and the ability to fire in engagement range. Predator Destructor often gets fielded with las cannon sponsons, the autocannon being nice against sort of medium to heavy infantry, getting extra AP against infantry. And if you add a couple of las cannons to that, then it becomes really quite a general purpose tank. It's going to be a solid and fairly long range threat against just about everything it targets. The gun tanks will enjoy dart packs for usually getting sustained hits against their targets. Not really too complicated to use in Warhammer 40k. Ideally keep them hidden behind ruins and then move forward to pop out and draw line of sight on things when it makes sense to. In particular, just having a bit of ranged firepower in an army often makes sense even if it's complementing a more melee strategy. There's some things that just make sense to destroy at range, things like fights first or fights on death units, or units that might be risky to charge if you bounce and then they hit you back. Some Chaos Slays go particularly big on the heavy hitting tanks though, maybe in particular Pactbound Zealots, adding easy extra damage. For firepower, they both ideally want to be within 24-inch range. The Predator can hold off a bit more if it wants to. Ideally towing into cover will be quite nice though, while you blaze away with heavy firepower, particularly the Vindicator with its 2+ save. Finally, for some more utility style units, first up we have Cypher, 90 points for the Chaos Lone Operative with the big pistol threat. It's quite nice to maybe have hovering just behind the main front line. If enemy units charge down your frontline threats, they might be able to get in range of his command point debuff, which could be really quite disruptive. Having to pay more CP for enemies nearby, you might be able to position him so he's out of line of sight, but also within range of a mid-board objective. Cheapish lone operatives are nice to have just for grunt work and doing actions and secondaries and things while staying completely safe and not being able to be interacted with. And Cypher himself is really capable of a very nasty counter-attack, barely able to handle entire squads worth of enemy standard space marines or lighter things, a whole bunch of plasma pistol attacks between range and melee plus his bolt pistol. Only for utility things, I think it's hard to pass up at least some allied demons and chaos space marines, in particular 40 points for some infiltrating nurglings. It's worth the investment to screen out a chunk of the mid-board. If the opponent's got infiltrators and scouts, then they won't be able to go within 9 inches of them, so you can basically guarantee an area where your arm is safe from that kind of thing. If they're able to deep strike screen or move block the enemy or something after that, then so much the better. If no infiltrators could even keep them in deep strike just to gum up board space or to do certain objectives like engage on all fronts or behind enemy lines. Or on allies as well, there's plenty of other options. Perhaps the Beasts of Nurgle stand out a bit. A single model that can scout forward, has 1 OC so can do actions, and is kind of disturbingly tough for the points cost. It's 7 wounds at toughness 9, and if he is damaged but not destroyed, he just heals all his wounds again. So basically lighter enemy units aren't going to be able to destroy them. It can make them pretty problematic to deal with, and still cheap enough to be sacrificial. If you're taking some Nurglings, it could be tempting to take a Beast along as well. Those are perhaps just a few of the more highlight staple units outside of others. But now let's move on to talk briefly about the army rule and focus on some detachments. The core rule for the Chaos Space Marines are the Dark Pact, basically allowing you to take a leadership test every time that you shoot and fight. In exchange for the Dark Powers giving you either sustained or lethal hits as a big boost to your damage output. If you fail it though, then you take D3 mortal wounds. So it means that for most Chaos Space Marine units with a leadership of 6, then you've got around about a 1/4 chance to fail. Some units have some icons to allow some rerolls. I'd say for this one, the vast majority of the time, it makes sense to use the Dark Pacts if you actually got meaningful damage going into an enemy unit. I guess the biggest reasons not to would be if you actually had the chance of destroying meaningful models or killing your unit outright if it was on really low health. And even then, it could potentially be worth the trade-off if the opponent's only going to destroy it next turn very easily anyway. I guess perhaps sometimes when the damage output just isn't going to do anything meaningful anyway, say a bunch of AP0 cultist shots going into a 2+ save. You've got such ludicrous overkill in your unit anyway that Dark Pacts aren't really going to add anything. I feel like as core mechanics go though, it's got a fair bit of fun factor, deciding whether or not to take risks for rewards, maybe pushing Chaos Space Marines to be a bit more of an aggressive damage dealer style army, and there's certainly ways that you can build around it a bit more, particularly with Abaddon the Despoiler, Hellbrutes, and the Pactbound detachment. Speaking of detachments though, let's talk about some of those, and the Chaos Space Marines have really quite a lot of options to choose from, though they're certainly an army when some of the detachments are just far stronger than others. At the moment, it looks like most people are having success with Renegade Raiders compared with any of the others. It's quite easily the most played one, and since the last balance update, they've had win rates for around about 52 to 57%, depending on competitive or casual data and the source that you look at. Since the Codex came out, it's always been one of the strong ones. I wonder if maybe the new Noise Marine datasheet and the Lord Discordant changes might have helped it out a bit compared with some. It looks like that one's had 2 Grand Tournament wins and plenty of high placings recently. Then the second and third most played ones are Pactbound Zealots and Creations of Bile. Pactbound Zealots with their big damage and chaos mark system. That also looks like it's doing rather well on the win rates at around about 52%, and also has a Grand Tournament win recently. Though interestingly enough, it looks like the Creations of Bile has been struggling recently, not so very long ago having a similar sort of performance to the Renegade Raiders, but at the moment both being far lesser played and less successful as well. Win rates are around about 44%. Apparently Infantry Rush Chaos Space Marines having more trouble than some. For the others, the Soulforged War Pack with the Demon Engines and the Veterans of the Long War sort of balanced one. They both get a fair amount of players but have never generally tended to be hugely successful. The Veterans one maybe having more hope in tournaments versus the Soulforged out of those two. And also worth mentioning Chaos Cult, which has basically never been played in any great numbers, but from time to time it seems that some clever tournament player manages to win big events with it, sending out waves of chaff to control the board and score points. The rest, though, I'd say are a bit overshadowed. The Deceptors, Dread Talons, Fellhammer Siege Host, and the Cabal of Chaos. Starting out, let's start with the Renegade Raiders then. The core rule for that detachment is Raiders and Reavers, giving you the assault keyword on ranged weapons and AP boost against things on objectives. Both really handy rules for a good number of units. Legionaries quite enjoy that for AP on the midboard, and it's good for any Space Marine gun tanks. Vindicators and Predator Destructors both enjoy. They've got an Armour of Contempt style stratagem for some reactive durability, an Advance and Charge for infantry or mounters, and that can work on Lord Discordants as well. A few things for transports, including a reroll hits and wounds for a unit disembarking, which is pretty brutal with some Chosen, and some movement shenanigans at the end of a fight phase. The enhancements are generally fairly usable as well. There's a Scout 6 inches for the Bearers unit, and a couple that get better if you're nearer the enemy deployment zone, a rerolling damage one and a command point farming one that could be usable enough on aggressive characters. For this one at the moment, I feel like it's also worth mentioning the Noise Marines. They can be allied in from Codex Emperor's Children as Cult Marines, and they get on particularly well with Renegade Raiders. In particular, they really enjoy the extra AP against things on objectives, and that one command point stratagem to reroll all hits and wounds when you jump out of transports. Between those and fairly general purpose damage dealer profiles with Ignore's cover, they've just got ferociously dangerous close range shooting when they're jumping out of a Rhino. Here's one example of a tournament-winning Renegade Raiders list. This one by Paul Roberts, who used it to take first at Dragon's Horde July GT, a small grand tournament of 26 players. This one seems to go heavy on the things that were buffed in the recent updates, with a good mix of threats. There's some heavy firepower with 2 Vindicators and a Forge Fiends with Ectoplasma. They'll enjoy being able to move around a bit faster. And then there's a pair of Chaos Rhinos with Noise Marines inside them, able to jump out and use that stratagem. It looks like there's a unit of Legionaries that might also join inside one of those Rhinos, with a Chaos Lord leading them, and there'll be a murderous melee threat charging into something or an objective. Then there's 3 big individual melee models, 2 Lords Discordant on Hellstalkers, each of them with Bale Flamer and Magma Cutter, and one with Dread Reaver. That's the one for the massive damage rerolls if they can get close to the enemy deployment zone, and feels like there's a pretty reasonable chance they might be able to, with a 14-inch movement and the potential to advance and charge for 1 CP if they need it. Vashtorr the Archifane is here as well. He's just pretty solid all around for his stats now after the updates, and those will give the list a bunch of good anti-vehicle as well if they happen to run into knights. Then to support all that, there's a bunch of chaff scoring units, Cultists for sticky objectives, a squad of Bikers, Cypher hovering around doing lone operative things, a Beast of Nurgle and 3 Nurglings. Overall looks like a scary and well balanced list, very shooty but with 4 big melee threats as well. For another recent example of a Renegade Raiders list that did well, this one by Deckers took second at a tournament in Spain, and this one's got a bunch of similar features, though some different choices. There's just the 1 Lord Discordant as opposed to 2, no Vashtorr, but Fabius Bile leading a massive squad of Chosen instead. He'd be a good pairing with them, amping up their big stat lines, and if presumably jumping out of one of those Chaos Rhinos would have a ridiculous amount of damage threat, with the reroll hits and wounds stratagem against things on objectives. Otherwise, there's a Chaos Lord with a Demon Hammer to lead a squad of Legionaries, a different choice of ranged threats with 3 Predator Destructors with Las Cannon Sponsons as opposed to the previous, again a pair of squads of Noise Marines with Blastmasters for their big threat, and then some slightly different scoring and skirmishing style units, Bikers, Raptors, 2 sets of Cultists here, Cypher, and again a Beast and some Nurglings. For a couple more slightly older examples, these ones wouldn't be including Lord Discordant, as that was before the update, but there was this one by a William Forriman who used it to take first at the Alpine Cup. This one basically goes for more fire support tanks and melee things jumping out of Rhinos. There's a unit of Warp Talons that can jump on and off the board for utility as well. And here's an example led by Abaddon the Despoiler himself. I'm not sure if it's him or Bile leading that big squad of Chosen there. Either could work quite well. Again, a whole bunch of gun tanks, and then this one's interesting in taking 2 enormous units of Possessed. They do also quite like the advance and charge stratagem and the extra AP against objectives, I suppose. Moving on to other flavours of Chaos, it seems that at least at the moment the Pactbound Zealots might be the other more standout scary one. This one's the slightly indexed style detachment where you get to mark each unit to one of the Chaos deities or Undivided, and if you pass the Dark Pact leadership test then you get critical hits on a 5+, and the Undivided gets to reroll ones to hit. Each of the Chaos marks allows boosted stratagems as well. Undivided can reroll wound rolls, you can get stealth, and Nurgle can just flat out turn off shooting at greater than 18 inches away, which is pretty powerful. There's a healing wounds one, and Celeste can advance, shoot and charge, so quite a good incentive for that one for melee units. Pactbound Zealots can potentially stack damage output just ridiculously high, given that you've got lots of Dark Pacts that can allow you to get critical hits on a 5+. It means that can pair well with Abaddon the Despoiler. He's got a big aura of reroll hit rolls, so gun units nearby can reroll everything that isn't a 5+, and he can certainly do an enormous amount of damage himself in close combat, potentially charging in alongside a squad of Chosen. Then if you wanted to stack the combo of shooting right to the sky, Hellbrutes allow you to get both benefits for the Dark Pact, so every 5 and 6 you roll would both get sustained and lethal hits. It can be nice enough in itself when you're getting the critical hits on a 5+, that if he did go all in investment, then him and Abaddon can make anything shooting within range just absolutely murderous. Between some combo of those buffs and the standard ones, Pactbound lists often tend to go pretty heavy on the ranged tank style units. This was one recent successful tournament winning example by Richard Forrest, who seems to have used the detachment to go 5-0 at a 30-player grand tournament. This one certainly got a massive amount of firepower. 3 Predator Destructors, 2 with las cannons, 1 with heavy bolters, and they're all Nurgle marked alongside 2 Vindicators, so provided they're passing their Dark Pact leadership tests, then they'll be blazing away with an enormous amount of sustained hits. And there is indeed a Hellbrute to make all the critical hits go off on a 5+. If that one's enough firepower though, there's also 2 Obliterators. Those ones are Tzeentch interestingly enough. That means lethal hits on 5s. I guess near the Hellbrutes you could get sustained as well. So I guess that they're Tzeentch marked because if you slay one of them and the other one's fine, then for 1 command point you can resurrect an entire Obliterator. Then to go along with that crazy amount of firepower, there's 3 units of 5 Possessed with Chaos Undivided. They could threaten the big Undivided reroll stratagem in the same turn that they use their devastating wounds to try and fish for more of those. There'd be quite nice objective trading units to skirmish with enemy ones there. Then there's a Celeste Lord Discordant, so you could advance and charge, getting a whole bunch of sustained hits, and also having the Intoxicating Elixir, so that's a 5+ feel no pain, so far harder to take out. And then finally to back that all up, there's just a few objective support things, 1 Beast of Nurgle, 2 units of Nurglings, one of them being upgraded up to 6 of them, and a squad of Cultists for the sticky objectives. The Cultists often get Nurgle marked as well, as that way you could turn off shooting against them if it matters. Overall looks all very scary, with a pretty massive amount of damage output there. For some other takes on the detachment prior to recent updates, here's one that won a small tournament by an Adam Dye. This one does go all in with both Abaddon the Despoiler and a Hellbrute. So any of the Vindicators and Predator Annihilators within range of those guys will have their damage output turned up to 11. And I guess something outside of Abaddon's range can be given +1 to hit with a Warpsmith. In this one there's 2 big squads of Possessed with Chaos Undivided, again for potential big wound rerolls. A squad of Chosen for Abaddon to lead I guess, and then 2 sets of expendable Cultists. Finally here's one more example placing highly at the LVO earlier in the year. This one looking maybe even more unusual compared with other Chaos lists, and being basically Chaos Tank and Demon Engine spam. 3 Vindicators, 3 Predator Destructors, 2 Mauler Fiends and 2 Venom Crawlers, plus a Hellbrutes to help out with the pacts, and then just a very minimal amount of small unit support, a Nurgle Warpsmith to lead the detachment, 2 sets of Skirmishing Chaos Bikers, and then 1 Cultist mob. Feels like you'd have to push to do some enormous amounts of damage very quickly indeed, as not much in this list has very much objective control. Next up for perhaps the big 3 detachments, we've got the Creations of Bile. And this one's the one that gives you some experimental augmentations at the start of the game and basically helps out Infantry Rush Chaos Space Marines. Fabius Bile improving on the Emperor's work with some huge roided out Space Marines. The core rule either allows you to pick 1 buff or roll for 2. If Bile himself is the Warlord, then he can re-roll 1 or both of the dice, and usually with that there's a pretty reasonable chance that you'll get something useful. Buffs to movement, attacks, weapon skill, strength and toughness are already helpful. The +1 to hit at range may be a bit less reliably so if you're mainly building around melee. Then it's got some good melee support for Chaos Space Marines, a -1 to hit for infantry, fights on death on a 4+, the opportunity to flex into other augmentations when it makes sense to, healing models and damage buffs against character units, and then a big advance and charge for infantry, always handy to have. Maybe the most common enhancement is the Prime Test subject, where you can make a super fighty Chaos Lord with +1 damage and reroll melee hits. With his interaction with the detachment rule, Bile himself is often seen leading these ones. He's already a good model to have in the first place, so not really any big reason not to run him. He's got a little bit of okay damage output, is weirdly tough for a character, but basically makes his squad both more resilient and more dangerous. +1 to the strength and toughness of models in his unit, really quite nice with Chosen to make them strength 6 and toughness 5, and he also negates an attack against the unit each turn, which could potentially be saving Chaos Marine lives. They certainly get used in other places, as we've seen already, but I feel like Possessed and maybe particularly stand out in this one. They move fast at 9 inches, hit fairly hard against infantry with strength 5, AP 1 and damage 2, and Dark Pacts with lethal hits keeps them relevant against tougher stuff, and are at least fairly sturdy with toughness 6 and 3 wounds. Once per game they get devastating wounds as well. I feel like it's hard to go too far wrong with multiple units of these guys in creations, given that they're really going to enjoy just basically any of the rolls that you make, aside from the +1 to hit at range 1. For some examples of creations of Bile lists from earlier in the year, here's one by Tom Mayer who used it to take first at a 50-player tournament. Fabius, Bile, Cypher and a Chaos Lord lead the way, the Chaos Lord with the Prime Test object to be extra fighty. There's 2 enormous squads of Possessed, a massive unit of Chosen that I guess Bile would go with, the Lord could potentially either go with the remaining Chosen or the Legionaries even, and everything that isn't a Possessed rides into battle in Chaos Rhinos. There's also a bit of support in allied Wardog Huntsmen and Carnivores here. These were pre-night updates. I guess Wardog Carnivores aren't so very different. I feel like people might be kind of tempted to go with the Lord Discordant in Codex now though. Here's another take on creations of Bile as well, again from earlier in the year. This one's led by Abaddon himself. I'd probably guess that Abaddon would join the smaller unit of Chosen and Fabius the big one, and then he could provide some enormous rerolls to anything else making melee, helping out his own units but potentially other ones nearby like the Possessed squads. Again, there's 2 big units of 10 of them. Interesting to see some other different damage dealers in this one as well though. There's a big unit of 10 Warp Talons with their ability to charge in, mess something up and then jump off the board, and then you can be rapid ingressing them the next turn to get them back. And there's also a squad of Plague Marines here as well. I guess they cost a little bit more now, given that that was prior to the Death Guard Codex update, but I guess would also have some better base stats at toughness 6. Moving on to maybe the slightly lesser played Chaos Detachments. As mentioned earlier, worth talking about the Chaos Cult, given that it seems to every so often do well at the tops of tournaments. This one's the one where you can make desperate pacts to have your unit surge across the board extra fast, a +2 movement and +2 inches to charges. So you can potentially have regular cultists put on a massive turn of speed, and you can have really quite a lot of units of chaff with traitor guardsmen gaining battle line. Then there's loads of stratagems to support them, the vast majority of them being best for accursed cultists, potentially re-rolling hits and wounds when shooting and fighting, or +1 to your attacks and strength when fighting, and some good enhancements that mostly seem best on dark communes. There's one for the Dark Apostle that allows you to revive D3 models. If you're playing this detachment at 2,000 points, it likely makes sense to take 3 units of accursed cultists that are maxed out and attach dark communes to them. They're quite pricey at 200 points, but that gets you 16 models in the squad. A bunch of them have 3 wounds as the torments, and while they might not have crazy standout damage, they will grind away at things with dark pacts, and particularly in this detachment where they can get some nice support stratagems. The dark communes will also make them harder to kill with a 5+ invulnerable save too, as well as just having the chance to charge really quite a long way between the detachment rules and the advance and charge that the dark commune can give. They also have their surge move as well, which can make them really annoying to deal with at range, potentially moving up to contest a mid-board objective, and the opponent shoots them and anything that's nearby might suddenly find itself out in melee. So not a unit that you can go near to if you want to repeatedly focus multiple units firepower on them. For one example of a Chaos Cult list from about 6 months ago, this one by Derek Apshe was used to take 8th at the LVO. It's only been the main one who's won the majority of big victories with this one. This one does of course start with 3 units of 16 accursed cultists, 2 with dark communes and 1 with the Dark Apostle with the revival stratagem. Fabius Bile apparently goes with a unit of cultists in a rhino, and then beyond that there's 9 other squads of traitor chaff to do board control and objective style things, going up the board being a pain to deal with, and likely going up the board and move blocking the opponent. There's also a fair amount of demon support in this one, 10 demonettes, 3 nurglings and Celeste. These ones were prior to the demon index updates though. If wanting yet more chaff, then it could be Beast of Nurgle as an option now. Next up we've got the Soulforged War Pack. This one's the one that focuses on Vashtorr's followers and the demon vehicle units. The core rule basically giving them a nice easy +1 to wound, so really quite good for mid-strength shooting like the Forge Fiend or the Venom Crawler perhaps, and helps out in melee too with +2 attacks. They've got some good support for the demon engine units, including quite a powerful enhancement for a Warpsmith. In general, this one's been quite a popular one that a lot of people have chosen to play, but for the most part doesn't really tend to see the most success on the competitive side of things. Maybe just being more about direct damage and defense and not having a whole bunch of sneaky tricks, and perhaps also the demon engines maybe not being quite as standout as things like the Predator Destructor or Vindicator, which most people tend to use instead if there's equal choices. It's definitely not bad though, and Vashtorr the Archifane certainly got a big boost recently. He's very good here with Lone Operative within 3 inches of any demon vehicle unit, and there'll be lots of those about, though he remains very solid everywhere else. For its 175 points, he's tough with 14 wounds and a 2+ save, has some big hitting melee with strength 14, damage 3, and anti-vehicle with devastating wounds, adds 2 to the strength of nearby demon engine shooting. Forge Fiends in particular getting on quite well with strength 12 ectoplasma cannons, and potentially having hazardous for enemy units shooting him too. Between all that, it's just going to be a pain to deal with, very hard to take out before he gets close, enough threats to beat up medium-sized units, and then enough defense that he's not going to get shot down too easily without some fairly serious commitment. Finally, for detachments I'll focus on more, there's the Veterans of the Long War. This one's the Black Crusader and Black Legion sort of themed detachment, and gives you a core rule of the focus of hatred, re-rolling hit rolls against your nominated targets, similar to Space Marine Oath of Moment. I would say that maybe beyond that, their supporting rules are a little bit more limited. They do have a nice reactive movement stratagem that can have some powerful tricks, plus an Armour of Contempt equivalent. People have done well and won tournaments with it in the past, though it does seem to be rather overshadowed by the other options currently. Then finally for the detachments, we've got the remaining 4, all of which I think have some fun factor, but don't generally tend to do quite as well for a few reasons. The Deceptor's main strength is infiltrating cultists and legionaries, which you can do with really quite a lot of them. The main issue with that though is that if you really go very heavy on that, as is the temptation, then you're just going to get massive swings as to who goes first. It's generally going to be a good time for Chaos if they get to deploy in the midboard and move everything around and deal damage turn 1, but less so otherwise, and potentially one enemy dropping an infiltrator unit really early on could screen out a whole bunch of the board. The Dread Talons does make Battleshock a bit more relevant and has some jump pack unit synergies. I feel like it's not really very well designed as a detachment though. There's just quite a few elements that don't really work too well on the units they can be used on, and some of the options only get good if targeting Battleshock things, which is never going to be reliable. The Fellhammer Siege Host makes you tougher, a -1 to wound against things that have higher strength, and a 5+ feel no pain stratagem versus shooting. A lot of the rest is quite situational though, and the Cabal of Chaos is the new Cypher and Demon Prince focused one. Again, just not really adding too much strength in my opinion, and being focused around a lot of units that don't see quite so much play in their own right. There are some things for fun factor, though it really doesn't seem to have been particularly popular compared with other new detachments. Not many people have been playing it. Finally, to finish off, I'll just talk through a bunch of units that I hadn't mentioned individually up to this point, some of which are genuinely quite strong and interesting, some of which less so. Chaos Bikers are a pretty excellent little skirmish unit, fairly cheap, fairly fast and fairly tough, and have a reasonable amount of damage, 2 melter guns and a power fist, often quite popular in Renegade Raiders. Obliterators come in sets of 2s that can deep strike and have a range of different profiles that can hit the enemy pretty hard. They can fire out of line of sight for a turn, which can be a big deal. Might tend to be in lists that can amplify their damage a bit, such as Pactbound Zealots or maybe even the Veterans of the Long War with the reroll hits. Havocs have got kind of okay damage output, but not particularly standout. They're also not very tough as well and might want transports to get them where they need to go. I feel like Games Workshop should probably make them a bit cheaper really. Raptors can be nice enough in small units of 5, dropping in to do secondary objectives and skirmishing with their peers. Warp Talons are interesting, with a damage profile that's fairly good at blending infantry, and if they destroy something then they can then warp off the board, and then you can bring them back with spending command points for rapid ingress, so they turn up in the enemy's turn again, all ready to charge something new. If they pick their targets, they can potentially jump around deleting units with the opponent basically unable to respond. I'd say they're priced kind of fairly for that ability. The Chaos Terminators maybe just feel like they're a tiny bit less standout than things like Chosen, Possessed, and Legionaries for mainline damage dealers. They pay a premium for their deep strike and their big armour and a bit of ranged output, and between all that just maybe dilutes them a little bit as to their primary purpose. They're still absolutely usable enough though, and can get some big rerolls when using Dark Pats. I've certainly seen some people use them, but they generally tend to be a bit overshadowed for some of the rest. The Nemesis Claw are the Night Lord's kill team legionaries basically. They've got the unusual and powerful ability to basically turn off stratagems if you're within melee with something. They may feel like a bit more of a high-end tech piece for top tournament players. For most people though, I feel like the premium they're priced at probably means that you're better off with just standard legionaries. The Traitor Guardsmen are basically cultists with boosted stat lines, but they lack the sticky objectives rule, and for that reason almost everyone takes the cultists instead, unless maybe in Chaos Cult where there's a bit more incentive to take them. Not awful as a unit, but not great when they pay more and lose really quite a powerful rule. The Felgor Beastmen can turn up on the flanks of an army, again paying a premium to get some annoying threat into the midboard turn 1. Their damage output and defense is fairly bad though. and then they can also ally in Khorne Berserkers, Plague Marines, or Rubric Marines from the 3 Deity Codexes. Khorne Berserkers maybe being a bit disappointing without the +2 strength of the Berserker warbands. Plague Marines are okay, but again maybe underwhelming without their Contagions on the go, as that's part of their datasheet value now. Rubric Marines can be interesting enough, particularly in Renegade Raiders, in a similar sort of way to Noise Marines. They'll enjoy the Assault keyword and the AP buff, though it seems that for sheer threat and a similar sort of role, people have been going for the Noise Marines currently. For the other vehicle datasheets, the Land Raider pays a premium to deliver things into melee and relative safety. The main downside, as with a bunch of Chaos armies, is that there just isn't really an obvious target to transport. The power armoured stuff can do well enough out of Rhinos, Terminators and Deep Strike. Possessed can just run across the board dead fast, and Abaddon wants to be on the board for his rerolls. It's definitely not unusable, just slightly directly inferior to doing other things, I think. The Helldrakes remain overcosted, unfortunately. Games Workshop really needs to cut the price on them a lot if they want them to see play. The Khorne Lord of Skulls is a massive centerpiece threat, could maybe be fun in the Soulforged War Pack, or perhaps even the Fellhammer one. Feels like that'd be intimidating to try and get rid of with a 5+ feel no pain against shooting. Morphines can rush in and do some general purpose big hitting melee damage, maybe interesting in Soulforged War Pack, but beyond that people tend to prefer the infantry melee damage dealers. The Lord Discordant and Vashtorr also I think outcompeted a bit right now. The Defiler is also maybe a bit better in the Soulforged War Pack. It's quite costly compared with its competitors in the Deity Legion codexes currently. The Predator Annihilator is okay if you want some long-ranged anti-tank, maybe most competing with the Destructor and the Vindicator, both of which I'd say are just a bit more efficient overall and a bit more general purpose. The Forge Fiend spams out its damage 3 attacks and could both be nice with Vashtorr around, or maybe for the undivided stratagem in Pactbound, it's got the chance to fish for a bunch of devastating wounds there. And the Noctilith Crown is an impressively overcosted fortification. It can allow you to re-roll some Dark Pacts, but best off take more units to roll more Dark Pacts on and actually do some more damage and defense. Going through the remaining characters, the Traitor Enforcer is the Commissar and Ogrin that leads the Traitor Guardsman, just as a bit of a cross purposes, and they do melee kind of things and are just sort of fundamentally at odds with what the squad wants to do. Chaff units want to be kept cheap as well. The Warpsmith can be an interesting enough choice if you've got a whole bunch of Chaos gun tanks. As you've seen in the list before, some people like to use them. They've got a bit of value between their healing and their damage buff, and are certainly pretty standout in the Soulforged War Pack. The Jump Lord has to attach to Raptors, and at the moment they don't really feel like they're costed for mainline damage output. They just don't handle tough stuff quite well enough to justify it. The Cultist Firebrand is a cheap leader for a Cultist unit, and again you wouldn't really want to lead Cultists too much, and if you're leading the Accursed Cultist you may as well have the Dark Commune, given the 5+ invulnerable saves and the big boosted turn of movement and damage. The Dark Apostle again might be best off with Accursed Cultists. In the Chaos Cult detachment, he can bear that Amulet of Tainted Vigour to revive some of them. It's kind of interesting in that he's really not too bad a leader for things like Chosen or Legionaries either, but he's competing with the Chaos Lord, and it's a little bit awkward with his Dark Disciples in a Rhino transport, as he's going to take up 3 slots there, and he might not be able to fit units in very neatly. There might be a little bit more of a maybe choice for a melee squad on foot. Harken Worldclaimer can also lead Raptors. He hands out some mortal wound impact hits for them. Also has a bit of his own melee damage, though I feel like he just feels a bit on the borderline side at 90 points, and again requires you to build around Raptors for damage output. Could be fun, but probably not super optimal. The 2 Demon Princes are both interesting enough. The regular one got Lone Operative and can hand out cover to nearby infantry. Might be alright for certain things like Possessed and Creations of Bile moving into the midboard. The Winged one can hit incredibly hard when it flies on a charge, potentially handing out around about 5 mortal wound impact hits before it even starts dealing damage. And both of them could get on well with things that enhance any one character, like maybe the Intoxicating Elixir for the 5+ feel no pain. I feel like for that sort of price tag and big character style role though, people are often tempted by the Lord Discordant at the moment, as it's just a really powerful datasheet. That feels like it's probably one of the factors that's making these guys a bit more niche recently. Huron Blackheart has a few interesting things with some redeploys and a once per game reactive move, possibly most interesting with Deceptors, allowing you to redeploy the infiltrating units. The Master of Executions could be a nice add-on character going alongside a Chaos Lord with Legionaries if you wanted a fairly maximal investment squad of that sort. A lot of people seem to think that he might be a bit overkill though and a bit too much investment on that style unit. The Master of Possession can get enhancements in a squad of Possessed, though is a bit disappointing for the actual buffs that he gives the unit. I feel like it was a lot more interesting when he gave them a 6+ feel no pain. The Sorcerer makes his squad very slightly harder to kill, plus hands out a touch of psychic damage with infantry debuffs, though really quite a disappointing datasheet. And finally, the Sorcerer and Terminator armor can mark units for extra AP against them. Really quite a handy buff, though maybe a touch annoying being restricted to Terminators, so you've either got to deep strike him on his own, where he's not going to be all that tough, or buy a really expensive bodyguard unit to go with, and neither feels super efficient. Definitely an interesting datasheet though. In any case, definitely quite a lot going on for the Chaos Marines, a few good ways to play them and plenty of strong units, and lots more that you can absolutely make work well if you have a mind to. I look forward to any thoughts or insights from Heretic Astartes players down in the comments. How have you been finding games with the faction recently, and has anyone been putting a Lord Discordant back on the tabletop? That was the end of this one, though I'll just cycle back to the video sponsor in Tabletop Stronghold to talk through a few of their options on their magnetic carry cases for those who are interested. As mentioned, they have their mag cases, where they basically have these steel trays that you can slot in at various different levels. These are the size of the trays and the amount of miniatures that you can fit on them, say 90 guardsmen or 6 armigers if they're absolutely fully loaded. Then their cases have a bunch of different sizes. The mini one is this one, maybe more designed for skirmish style games, around about £70 to £75 or dollars if you use the discount code 8025 while it's active. Still plenty of room in this one for some big tanks and a phalanx of Terminators though it seems. Then the standard size one is around about $120 with the code. This one's really quite a lot taller, as you can see by the great big Chaos Knight on the bottom floor of it. The cases all come with a whole bunch of magnets to put on bases. I'll leave the internal usable dimensions here on the screen. Then there's the really big one as well, which is basically 2 of the previous essentially attached together. Should be big enough for the majority of big armies out there, and there's a few options depending on the amount of trays that you want. You can opt to get more or fewer of them. In any case, a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. You can check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like to take a look over their cases. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel and you'd like to help support, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and help keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a few other advantages as well, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, an automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.